This is Gareth Southgate, and this is the Three Lions podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Three Lions podcast. My name is Russell Osborne and this is an independent England football supporters podcast. I hope you're well, looking after yourselves in these lockdown times. I'm putting this episode out in between the current international break. Whenever I say that now, I'm always reminded of a previous episode where I spoke with the BBC's commentator John Murray, who said, they're not breaks. Not for the players, not for the staff, not for the people who have to work during them. So we'll go with international window. And speaking of commentators, I hope you'll enjoy this episode as I'm speaking with another. Seamless. John Driscoll has joined me. We'll speak a little bit more about that in a moment. Now, during lockdown the first time around, I started to read a little more. I have to be honest and say I'm not the fastest of readers. But I started to find various books written by England supporters about their travels following England. And you may remember I spoke with Glyn Davies about his book called About the Game, The Lot. I've also read To Lose or Not to Lose by Jamie Mash, Playing for England by John Hemmingham, and I'm currently in the middle of Tear Gas and Ticket Touts by Eddie Brimson. Perhaps one episode I'll cover these books in more detail. Book club, maybe. But as I said, this episode we are speaking with Sky Sports commentator John Driscoll, as he also has a book coming out. But before that, some sad news. Sadly, a couple of former England internationals have passed away recently. On the 10th of November, born in 1937, Tony Waiters was 83, and he played in goal for England 5 times in 1964 under Alf Ramsey. They played predominantly for Blackpool as his club side, but he also represented Macclesfield Town and Burnley. But with regards to England, he made his debut away to the Republic of Ireland in a 3-1 win. Unfortunately, his second game was a 5-1 defeat to Brazil in the Maracanã. He then played twice at Wembley, drawing with Belgium and beating Wales, before his last appearance away to the Netherlands in a 1-1 draw. And according to the excellent England Football Online website, Alf Ramsey named his provisional list of 40 players for the 1966 World Cup. He then named a provisional squad of 28 to attend Lilleshall. Tony Waiters was one of the 12 cut, but he was asked to remain on standby. And he later spent time in Canada and in fact became the Canadian manager at the 1986 World Cup finals in Mexico, which was Canada's only appearance at a World Cup finals. Then on the 12th of November, Albert Quixell passed away. He was 87 years old, born in 1933, and like Tony Waiters, he also played 5 times, but under Walter Winterbottom, England's first manager. Quixell was a striker. Whilst he didn't score for England, he did score plenty for his club sides, Sheffield Wednesday, Manchester United and Oldham Athletic. His England career consisted of a debut against Wales in a 4-1 away win, a friendly 4-4 draw in an England versus the rest of the world game, a home win over Ireland, all in 1953, and then in 1955 he played on tour, drawing against Spain, then losing to Portugal. It may come as a surprise that he wasn't the only player to play for England with the surname beginning with Q. Alf Quantrill played 4 times back in 1920-21 season. I'd like to pass on our condolences to both Tony Waiters and Albert Quixell's family and friends. my guest this episode is current Sky Sports commentator, and we've also heard him on the likes of 5 Live, Match of the Day, TalkSport 2, and he's also current host of the La Liga Weekly podcast. And now, an author too. Please welcome John Driscoll.
It's good to be here, Russell. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for coming on. So you are a football commentator in these current times at Sky Sports.
Yeah, well, I'm freelance, so available for hire, available to whatever in this day and age, whatever you got, I'll wash your car for the right money. So I work for Sky. I did a lot of years doing the Spanish football for them, and now I do some championship games. So people around the world might hear me on an international feed as well for Sky, and then I do a highlights roundup as well, which if you subscribe to Sky's iPad service, I'm on that as well. So I basically watch every Premier League game for Sky and do highlights. I do some commentary on the championship, and then obviously because I've got my La Liga podcast, so then I spend the Saturday, Sunday evening trying to catch up with the Spanish, or watch all the Spanish games, and then watch them as many as I can on the Monday morning. So sort of by the early part of the week, I've sort of watched 20 games a weekend, trying to get my head around 2 leagues, which is great. Good way to make a living. Occasionally, someone asks me a question, and I'm thinking, I don't know. I watched too much football this weekend, So, but yeah, I'm still on Sky. I'm on Quest sometimes as well on the Football League highlights program as well, and various bits and bobs. You might hear me, as I say, available for hire.
How long have you been commentating or reporting as in your profession?
So I started out as a news journalist. So I did a degree in politics, my journalism conversion course, and then I was a news journalist for quite a few years. So that's about 20 or 27 or something like that. So I did a good block of time and then basically I lacked confidence early on that I could become a sports reporter. I thought it was too much of a dream job, and I thought it'd be far more sensible to become a news reporter. It's only after I'd been a news reporter for quite a while, looking at people doing sport, thinking, I could do that. I know as much about football as he does. I was paying to go to football on a weekend and then working news all week. So I gradually changed over, and I was working at a radio station in the Northeast, and then they got the rights for Middlesbrough games, and I'm a Middlesbrough supporter. So I then started just going along and doing the interviews on the pitch side. It was in Brian Robson's managerial days. So I then became the pitch side reporter. And then I went to Metro, and then I worked there as a sort of, I was the sidekick on the breakfast show doing sport and going to games, not as a commentator, but again, as the pitch side reporter and before and the after game and all of that stuff. And that was in Keegan's day. So Keegan was a dream then. He was brilliant to deal with. He was emotional. So he would, if they'd lost, he could be very spiky, but he would sit down, consider the access you have, the difficulty you have getting access to managers now. Keegan would sit down and do 5-minute interviews with local radios in those days. It was brilliant to deal with. So I was there. I was working in Metro when the choke happened, the great choke of 95, 96. So they were great days. And then I left there to go and work for the first websites. So the very early days of football clubs having websites. So I did Newcastle and Middlesbrough. I edited those 2 websites. I'm not very techie, but it was straightforward enough. And then from there, I went to Talk Radio. And what I didn't realise, it was a secret plan from Kelvin McKenzie to launch Talk Sport. And so what they'd done was they'd hired suddenly 3 or 4 sports specialists appeared on sports radio, on Talk Radio, sorry. And then overnight, they fired, literally Christmas time, they fired all the non-sports staff, launched Talk Sport the next week.
Really?
Yeah, so they were fascinating days, crazy days, because we were just blagging it, and the whole thing was a massive blag, just to literally where we're doing stuff. I mean, so much now is, ironically now, so much stuff is done off the telly. It was considered an outrage then that we were commentating games and reporting games off the telly. But I remember reporting a game on Talk Sport, the new Talk Sport, before before clubs really had many clubs had websites, and there was still the old phone line. You used to ring the premium number and get a report every 10 minutes. So I was commentating, the reporter pretending to be at a game for TalkSport, but I was ringing Club Call and writing down what they were saying, and then going on TalkSport, pretending that I was saying it for real myself, So, yeah, so it was an interesting start. to my sports career. Then I did that for a few years, and then I went freelance and started working for slightly more. I mean, TalkSport's a great company now. It's it's a proper company now with proper rights and actually does everything properly. But it wasn't in those days. So it was then. I then started working for the BBC and Sky at the same time.
Wow. So I mean, you mentioned about watching games on TV. I'm guessing then that the whole current situation we're in at the moment, coronavirus, hasn't affected you work-wise as maybe we think it may.
I mean, it's a funny business. Yeah, it's a strange time for everybody, isn't it? But
of course,
the business of televising football, thankfully for me, and I think for fans as well, has been largely protected. So I've switched to doing it from home, basically, the highlights.
Yeah.
So I can do that. And for the commentaries, you're still going in. So the stuff I've done, I've done so some red button commentaries. I've done the Quest highlights and internationals, and that's all been from studios. So the Premier League, they're actually going to the Premier League, and they've got some privileged access to there. Yep. But quite a lot of football commentary now isn't in the stadium anyway, just for cost saving purposes. So in that respect, it hasn't massively affected it. I mean, obviously lockdown meant there was literally no football, and as a freelancer, that was worrying times. Luckily, I'd already agreed, Pitch had already accepted my idea for this book. And so I was able to, I did a lot of readers because I've done, it's effectively 50 biographies in this book. So it was a lot of books to read, a lot of general history books, and then as many of the biographies and autobiographies as I could.
We'll touch on the book at the moment, but you mentioned there Brian Robson, Kevin Keegan, two major England players of the past, and you've done plenty of work with the England team as well, or around the England team.
Yeah, so that was in the TalkSport days. So the early days of TalkSport, I followed England around. So that was Kevin Keegan will have been there by then, and so we it's for Euro 2000, but we did the tournament anyway. So the commentary came from Amsterdam, from a hotel room. It was in the news at the time. We were in the newspapers for doing this. So Alan Parry and Jim Proudfoot were commentating, and I travelled around. So I travelled to all the games, not just England games, but wherever I could. I had an engineer and we were driving separately. So it was quite hair raising, getting around the whole of Holland and Belgium with this little satellite phone. It's only the size of a small briefcase or something. So you put that on your car. If people came and stood in the way, it stopped working. So you're trying to shoo people away who were from all around Europe. And so that sort of limited English. And we would basically try and pitch up as close to the stadium, park as close to the stadium with police and everything in the way. And then try and do scene setters and post-match reaction with fans and all of that. It was exciting, but it was a nightmare as well. But for Euro 2000, I was in, when there was real trouble in Charleroi. Yes. I was there that day. All the TV had come and hired balcony apartments and stuff around the main town square, so they were all nice and safe. I had this satellite phone on a wheelie bin or something. And all the worst of the England fans were in full flow that day. And there was quite a lot of drink being sunk very early. And then weirdly, this is typical of TalkSport in the day, I got a call because they had Peter Shilton in a castle hotel in Namur, which was, I can't remember how far it was away from Charleroi. So and he couldn't get his kit working. So we had to go and get Peter Shilton connected up. And then we had a cup of tea with Peter Shilton, and then we got back, and the atmosphere was strange, and the ground was wet, and there was the smell of wet dirt in the air. And it turned out the police had been, and it kicked off. So I have no idea whose fault it was, how it happened. So it kicked off, and then they turned the hoses on the England fans and all of that. So I missed the big story of the day that was then all over the news. But then I was there for the rest of the day interviewing England fans, and obviously the vast majority of England fans are there having a lovely time, having a few drinks and everything. But there is a very small noisy contingent who are very easily found if you want to go finding them, who are not there to to do the same. And obviously, unfortunately, it's the way the media works, isn't it? No one's interested in a couple of blokes having a quiet beer and then meeting up with their friends and going to the game. That's not as interesting a story as a gang of people chucking tables and stuff around. But anyway, as the day went on, obviously all the fans went up to the ground. We weren't allowed in, so I'm left there with all the England fans who didn't have tickets, who have been drinking all day, and they keep coming to me to do these live interviews, and I think really rather wouldn't. But then it became more respectable because I was there the day that Keegan quit. So I was at the last game at the old Wembley when Dietmar Hamann scored that long-range goal. Yeah. And then...
Wasn't a nice day, was it?
No, grim. Absolutely. The whole thing. The weather was grim. It was wet. It was cold, and it was grey. And England were terrible. We'd totally lost our way, which was a shame because, like I said, I had so much time for Kevin Keegan. But, it was typical of him to quit immediately after a game, wasn't it? It's so emotional. And to, not let it go in, not have a think about it. And, where are we going with it? None of that with Kevin. So he quit, and then I had to try and get it live in. So I stood at the front of the press conference. He did Sky, quit on Sky, basically, didn't he? Yeah. And then he came into the press conference, and I had to sort of muscle away and stand at the front of the press conference. And he said to me, "You can't just stand up, John. So I had to kneel down interviewing Kevin Keegan while there's about 300 journalists all trying to fire questions at me. And then I was there through the Sven era. So I was in Munich. I was on the running track actually in Munich for the 5-1.
Oh,
so that was amazing, absolutely amazing, because it was one of the where you just had to. Have we really scored? Have we really scored again? Have we scored again? Because early on it didn't look like that, did it? It looked like we were in trouble. Yeah. But then, I can't remember the details. You haven't got the best view, to be fair. But I mean, you've got a brilliantly exciting view, but you haven't got a really tactical vantage point of you when you're touchline. But you do see the speed of it, and you see the speed of Michael Owen running away, and as they say, even Heskey scored. Yeah. So they were great days. Followed England around for a good couple of years. Albania, was there for that one. Went to Greece. Went to quite a lot. Went here, there, and everywhere. And then I didn't go to the World Cup 2002. I did that from the telly. Right. And then that was the end. That was the end of me at TalkSport. And then, unfortunately, once you're a freelance, unless you're a top freelance, you're scrabbling around for work. So I recently did Denmark Faroe Islands for Sky. Okay. It's Martin Tyler does the England games, and the rest of us do what we can. So I don't now cover England for anybody. I go with the kids. I've got a football mad son. My daughter less so, but she'll come to an England game. We went down. The last one we went down to Southampton to the Kosovo game, which is amazing, brilliant. Because I miss the days. I know Wembley's brilliant, and I know it's a national stadium and all of that, but I miss when England travelled around. I used to like that. I used to go into Derby, going to Middlesbrough, Manchester, the Greece game in Manchester where Beckham scored the last-minute free kick and all of that. I thought that was brilliant for England. I didn't think we needed a national stadium, especially not one that crippled the finances of English football for all those years. But here we are. We've got it. I'm not in favour of knocking it down. No, it's there. But it was brilliant being in Southampton. And we're sitting there close to the players, and again you see the speed of the players. I think Sancho and Sterling played that day, didn't they? And you see those guys at full pelt. Wow, these guys are top. And you could hear Jordan Henderson shouting and swearing and cajoling and all of that. It was brilliant. Yeah. So if I can, I take the kids if I'm not working.
Oh, well, we must say hello at the next England game when we're allowed in.
Yes. Oh, yes. One day soon, hopefully.
So you mentioned about you had this period of time. Obviously, we all had a period of time lockdown where you were reading all these books and sort of racking up the history on various players about the game, and it's culminated in this book of yours called The 50 Football's Most Influential Players.
Yeah. So the idea is it's twin track. Partly they are. I'm claiming that they are individually influential. In reality, what I'm trying to do as well is tell the story of football all the way through. So from Victorian times, really, when the game as we know it was written down and codified in England by former public school boys in London, all the way through. Raheem Sterling is the 50th person in the book. And so I'm trying to knock the story on all the way through. So we start with Charles Alcock, who is a player in those days. Back in those days, football didn't look like football. The clue is if you look at Australian rules football, those rules were written before the FA's rules that we now know as football, or I'm comfortable with people saying soccer because it explains the difference. And so there was a big split. Obviously, they lost the rugby people, and it looked like the most brutal game when you read the rules of it. They were allowed to kick each other in the shins, and that part, one of the splits, was over that. There were people who say, "Well, no, you're not manly enough unless you're allowed to actually rake each other down the shin." Really? Yeah. So it goes from those days. From Charles Alcock, who set up so he got the FA Cup going. He helped codify the rules. And then he set up the first internationals. So they played these series of internationals against Scotland. So they're not initially recognised at first because they were basically Charles Alcock's mates who sounded a bit Scottish.
That's right.
Was the first one. So, but then, when understandably the Scots said, "Can we pick our own team, please?" So fair enough. So they then took a team up and they played against largely the Queen's Park team because obviously football had sprung up all around the country. There were people playing football. It wasn't purely the preserve of the public schools. So the Scots could play football as well. And it turns out they were quite good at it. And so Alcock took his team up. He only ever played one international because by then he was injury prone. I'm not surprised the brutality of the game, not surprised that he was injured all the time. So he did get to play one international. And so then I move on. And so from then, the next guy in the book is Scottish because there's a huge Scottish influence as the game professionalizes. So Jack Ross is the second person. And so I keep it moving through. So the choices of the people involve me knocking the story on a little bit, as well as the first person to do this, the most important person to do that. And so I keep the story moving on all the way through. And then, so the next England player is Vivian Woodward, who is a great amateur. Because there was this amateur professional split. So initially, the England authorities wanted the national team to be an amateur team. And the first time that a pro played for England, he wore a different colour shirt to the rest of the players. And they tried to keep this thing that you had in cricket of the gentlemen and the players, where there was a different status afforded to the amateur, so the gentlemen, the posh people, basically against the commoners who wanted to get paid for it. Yeah. And so then that was the decline. And then, unfortunately, there is a bit of a gap in the England team because it still annoys me to this day, Russell, honestly, the isolationism of those early days. So England could have won that first World Cup. Maybe. We'll never know because we didn't play in it. Yeah. There were two early FIFA splits, but essentially our second FIFA split happened just before the World Cup started. And so Dixie Dean, who is the next England international, who's featured in the book, Male England International, because there was a bit of a Lily Parr,
yes,
the early women's game, and they played an international. It's in inverted commas because it was probably, there's no independent verification that the French team were all French, and that so it's not an official international still. And so you then get on to Dixie Dean, and we were or the English authorities were utterly convinced that we were the best at football and were determined not to prove it to anybody because we never played. We just simply didn't play Uruguay, and we didn't. We played a game against Austria and drew in that era. We might have won. We might have been the best in the world, but we didn't know. And so Dixie Dean's career, his international career, was largely spent playing against Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and then these sort of summer tour internationals. He still banged in loads of goals. We were still among the powers, but there was this great sense of English isolationism as the game is growing up, and the Uruguayans are playing a different brand of football, and the Argentinians are playing a different brand of football, and England stays ignorant about it until we get to Stanley Matthews, who started in isolation, and then, of course, post-war. I'm sure you'll know the story. I tell briefly the story of the 1950 humiliation. Because Stanley Matthews, again, if I'm honest, I've probably got like too many English players in this. But I'm an English fan, and I expect England people to buy it. So what I try and do, try and tell all the story. So I'm off around the world. There's an early Argentine footballer who's in there. And then later on, it spreads wide. But I keep trying to wend it back into England, keep trying to knit it back in. Yes. So the narrative goes. So, Stanley Matthews, who's a brilliant player. There's a biography about him, an autobiography, but also watch images of him. It's on YouTube. Of course. Amazing. He was a massive try-hard, Stanley Matthews. He trained harder than anybody else. He worked at it harder than everybody else. He did it longer than everybody else. But you watch him play, he swerves in and out of defenders. His acceleration off the mark was brilliant. But obviously, his sort of international career is defined by two humiliations. He didn't play in 1950, but Tom Finney did. Tom Finney is, again, one of the 50. But then Matthews is involved in the first game against Hungary, which is the great humbling of English football. It's still having lost in the 1950 World Cup and not having any evidence that we were the best in the world, still convinced that that England was the best in the world, until Hungary came in 1953. And you watch that game. The weird thing about that game, it's not watching Hungary, it's watching England. You watch Hungary, they look like a modern football team. They're passing the ball, they're moving, they're playing 1-2s, and all of these things. And Puskás, because Puskás is in the book as well. Amazing story, Ferenc Puskás. He does a drag back, and Billy Wright goes in 2-footed and lands on the floor and on the seat of his pants, and Puskás drags it back and runs away. So it was just the game had moved on. And England were behind the times. And you try and watch that game, the Wembley game, 1953, for Stanley Matthews. It's not certain he's playing for quite some time, because the camera frame is obviously reasonably near the centre of the pitch. Because he's on the right wing, you don't see him. He literally is standing out in the right wing, and Hungary is swarming all over the middle. They're dominating the midfield, which is they reinvented the game. And England, I'm afraid, didn't. So Stanley Matthews, Tom Finney, and then on to Bobby Charlton, obviously, because it was,
when we finally caught up.
Yeah. And so we found a way of winning in 1966. That's my interpretation of that. Alf Ramsey was a pragmatic coach. Yeah. Funnily enough, it's seen as the dawning of 4-4-2, but they described it as a 4-3-3 in the early stages of the World Cup, a loose 4-3-3. And also, it's a bit more subtle than the 4-4-2. I don't know how old you are, Russ, but when I grew up playing football, we played 4-4-2. Everybody. So school team played 4-4-2. If you played for a team on a weekend, it played 4-4-2. You went to game at the weekend, and they played 4-4-2, and England played 4-4-2. So by the time I was playing football in the late 70s, early 80s, it had become this default predictable formation. But it wasn't really in 1966, because Bobby Charlton played in advance of Nobby Stiles. And they had two very hard-working forwards in Hurst and Hunt once Jimmy Greaves was injured.
Yeah.
And we found a way through. The South Americans hated it. In Pelé's section, he's obviously bitter about 1966 because he got clogged out of the tournament. He's right, he did. We were entering a period of brutal football. And again, when you watch back, and it probably got worse in the 70s again, and into the 80s, because again, you watch the old videos back and you think, how on earth did they get away with some of these tackles? Yeah. I watched England-Cameroon, the 1990, jumping forward a bit. And I tell you what, the tackles we were putting in on them.
That was played during the summer, wasn't it? They repeated it. I think it was on the BBC, and I remember watching that thinking, cool, how'd they get away with that? It was both teams as well.
Oh, yeah, because we tend to think of them, because the infamous tackles from the Cameroon players was the first game against Argentina, wasn't it? When
Caniggia, was it? Yeah.
Yeah, he's running through, and it's Benjamin Massing, who looks like he's trying to kill him. He just kicks him. He'd been fouled by one, and he's stumbling, and then Massing comes in, and he comes from off camera, like a locomotive train has hit him, and Caniggia goes flying, and his boot goes flying, and everything. They were more brutal days. But so 1966, it's just Bobby Charlton. I felt guilty about not putting Bobby Moore in, because obviously English football hero. But the task I'd given myself was telling the whole of football in 50 mini biographies. And Bobby Charlton's just such an interesting. What a career! I think he's England's best player ever, Bobby Charlton, for his achievements, for having been obviously he was at Munich. He got pulled out of the wreckage at Munich. It haunted him for the rest of his life. Well, he's still alive, still does. But then, so he was not just part of England's greatest moment. He had that amazing story for Manchester United as well, from the despair of Munich to winning the European Cup. So I couldn't ignore Bobby Charlton. And then Viv Anderson was my choice for my. So I don't remember Bobby Charlton as a player. He was a ubiquitous name when I was a kid. Bobby Charlton, everyone knew the name Bobby Charlton. He was on telly and everything. But Viv Anderson's the first. So that's my first England era. So I remember Viv Anderson making his debut. Obviously significant because he was the first black player to play for England. Yeah. Although he doesn't want that to be his legacy. He sort of played it down. Although he's funny enough, he's a bit more willing to talk about it now. I've heard other interviews with him in which, because the lack of black managers, I think, has exercised him again now. But so it was those days again. So my early recollection of those football days was this bizarre mix of days of. It's a whirl of paradoxes, as I put it in the book. So black players had unprecedented opportunities, but they were racially abused. We had an England team that didn't qualify for successive World Cups, but a set of English clubs that were dominating in Europe. It was the start of the long ball days. Really direct football was coming in, but the best teams were Liverpool and Nottingham Forest, who played this lovely, stylish football, got it on the ground, played. I think it's a mistake I think it's a bit of a myth that the English style is hoof it. I think that's wrong. I think the DNA of English football is fast-paced football, but I think it's fast-paced, skillful, stylish football. I think is what people want. They don't want hoof merchants. I might be wrong.
No, I think we all want to watch nice football, don't we? We want it to be pleasing on the eye, and obviously we all want the right result at the end of it.
Yeah, but what I don't think, because again, I go into it when I get to Xavi with Spain. I don't think English people necessarily want that possession-dominated football to be the way. I think it's grown up with, the weather is a factor, isn't it? It's cold. Our pitches aren't brilliant. That kids, they are in academies now. Kids are playing on 4G pitches, so it is a different style of football. But so that was those were my early days of Viv Anderson. So he was a bit of a hero of mine, Viv Anderson, when I was a kid. So he's in it. And then Gaza was I was torn between Gaza and Lineker.
Because glad you have to make these decisions.
Yeah, it was so difficult. But obviously Lineker was gone by Euro '96, so Euro '96 had to be in. But also, there were brilliant World Cups. If you're our age and you don't remember 1966, it always ends in disappointment for England. I've got used to that now.
Yeah.
I don't get too angry or disappointed about it. And so 86, obviously Maradona's in, because Maradona is just an incredible story from beginning to end. There was. I watched. Have you seen the Maradona film? If you haven't seen it,
is it called Goal or?
I think it's just called Diego or Diego Maradona. But there's all sorts of footage in it. There's video of him because he's with the Camorra, which is the Neapolitan version of the mafia, who he's friends with when he's in Napoli. Other stuff that you'll see on YouTube of Maradona. Yeah. He gets into a fight in the Copa del Rey final against Athletic Bilbao, against the Butcher of Bilbao, who'd broken his leg earlier. And they are literally running around kicking each other. Maradona kicks somebody in the head and knocks him out. So, that's tiny bits of Maradona. So you had to have Maradona in it. So he obviously tells the story. It's Asif Kapadia, Diego Maradona film. That was that brilliant film.
And he, just going back to Cameroon, he was in 1990. I think he was another one who was caught by the Cameroon defence at times.
Oh yeah. He got a proper kicking all the way through his career, and he didn't lie down and take it, did he, Maradona? It's funny. I was talking to a younger guy who's a friend of mine, whose dad brought him up hating Diego Maradona, because I said, you should watch that film. He said, I'm not going to watch it if it makes me like Maradona.
I think even as an England supporter, you can't deny how good Maradona was. Obviously, he had those two moments in that game.
Yeah. 5 minutes apart.
Exactly. Yeah. You can disregard one and you can appreciate the other.
Yeah, it was Maradona in 5 minutes, wasn't it? Yeah. It was both, wasn't it? It was because he obviously cheats. But I don't know. See, again, I remember, because I'd have been 14, I think. I remember not being certain that he'd handballed it, because the official. This is in defence of the match officials, because he goes up with Shilton. Shilton. Much as I like Peter Shilton, he was a limited goalkeeper, and I need to get. It's another thing I need to get over, Russell. But I'm still working on it after all these years. That 1990 penalty shootout, but he comes to punch it, but he doesn't get up off the ground, does he?
No.
So Shilton's virtually touching the ground. He's still on the still, and Maradona's hand is just slightly above his head, and he just nudges it past Shilton, and then his teammates aren't going to celebrate. Maradona says, "Come on, celebrate!" England go crazy because England have obviously seen it
Yeah.
But the TV commentary didn't mention it. It took them quite a lot of time. You know, obviously now you've got brilliant TV. You know, there's a big team of people on digital, so just whizzz, and it's back, and they've checked it and they've replayed it. So it took ages, in my recollection, for them to work out that it was handball. And even when England are going crazy, when Butcher and Reed and everyone is going to the referee, and they're all going, they're pointing at their hands and stuff. The referee, leave me alone. But I was also told, I do mention this in the book, years ago when I was working at the BBC, someone told me that they re-edited the BBC radio commentary.
Oh, did they?
Put a mention in of the handball because, again, the radio commentator hadn't mentioned it at the time. It was another commentator from the era who told me that. So
there you go.
It was a reasonably good source.
Inside information there.
Yeah, and then of course 5 minutes later he scores that brilliant goal. And as so I then contrast the commentary because there's a Uruguayan commentator who's crying, calling him a cosmic kite and all of that, and then Barry Davis, stiff upper lip by contrast, is that you have to say that's magnificent. Yeah, and of course it was. It was just bitter for us. But I'm a Venables fan. I think Venables has been the best England manager that I recollect because I thought we played really good football in Euro '96. It took us a while to get going. The Switzerland game was hard work. Start of the Scotland game was hard work. But then, Gaza. Yeah, I love Gaza. And again, I've got over it's Gaza is almost like the embodiment of England to me, in that at the time I was yearning, almost angry that he wasn't making the best of his talent, because I think he was the most talented midfielder in the world at that time. But he wasn't the best midfielder in the world consistently because he, as Dino Zoff said, he had ice cream for breakfast and beer for lunch, which obviously limited him. And then his tackling is not just his lifestyle, but his tackling. The tackle on Gary Charles, we talk about Benjamin Massings. So the 91 FA Cup final, he's trying to kick him out of the stadium.
He's just so hyped up for it, wasn't he?
Yeah. Beyond anything normal. He said he had an injection beforehand to calm him down. I mean, one, I don't know what that means. And secondly, it didn't work, whatever it was.
No, that's
and
true.
So that sort of limited him. And then he had the weight problems. And then, of course, it was a sad end for him with Hoddle not going to the 1998 World Cup. But you can sort of see it. I'm sure you remember, there'd been so much in the build-up, hadn't there? So much talk of the nights out and the lifestyle and all of that. And he wasn't the player that he could have been. He wasn't the player that he had been by then. But he tells a good old story, Gaza, so...
as Middlesbrough pitch side person, did you come into contact with him?
No, I didn't, so I wasn't doing it. But I did go and see them in that period because he was actually quite disappointing at Middlesbrough, and it was quite upsetting for him because I remember the fanzine Fly Me to the Moon had a vote, and he was voted the most disappointing player at Middlesbrough that season. I think it was quite wounding for him because it was the fans' voice, and so I think it's quite easy to dismiss journalists. And say, oh, well, you've got to ignore the press. But I think when there's been a vote, and quite a lot of people vote, at least hundreds, maybe thousands of people vote in these things. Yeah. So it was disappointing. But I was there doing stuff, but they protected him, actually, thinking about it. I can't remember interviewing Gaza, even though I think by then I was doing the website, I think, if I remember rightly. So they always would put someone else up, and he would do stuff. He was still like letting down people's tires and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, there's some gross stories. There's a gross story about Gennaro Gattuso in there, in Gaza. But the club were very, very protective of him, didn't want that kind of stuff getting out. So they were just, no, don't say anything about Gaza, don't say anything about Gaza. And so we sort of looked after him. But, it's a sad story, isn't it? Because he's still there. I mean, literally one day I was writing about Gaza, and I couldn't remember something. I Googled it, and Gaza, and there he was, allegedly breaking some lockdown rules or something in an off license or something. Oh, God, it's still going, still at it. I sort of wish him well. You hope he sorts him. He finds some peace, I think is probably the fair way of putting it. But I finished with a quote from Lineker saying that none of us ever really understood it. And if you don't understand Gaza, you won't get the best out of him. So you've got to accept that that's Gaza. That's it. That's his story. There's a sadness to it, or you can also concentrate on the joy that he brought. And he was a brilliant footballer in his early days. I thought at his best at Newcastle, or maybe that season post World Cup before the injury at Spurs. That's the Gaza that hopefully we'll all end up remembering.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually just talking about Gaza and kind of bringing it bang up to date, that the likes of Jack Grealish are being compared to him, obviously not off the pitch, but on the pitch. And it'd be great to have someone like Gazza in the current setup. But I mean, could Jack Grealish go on and be the next Gazza?
I'm all for Grealish being in the team. He's not the next Gazza, is he? He's not. Bear in mind, in terms of raw ability, Gazza, I think, like as I said, was the most talented midfielder of his generation. Jack Grealish isn't, but I do want him in there. I think it's the position that we've always struggled to fill. Our midfielders they were hard-working midfielders, good, honest, hard-working bloke midfielders, and we've had Brian Robson style midfielders, dynamic, brave as anything, put his head in everywhere. We've been able to produce pacey wingers. I think in the England game at the moment, in the developmental structure, there's an obsession with pace. If you look at the players that England are producing, very much of a sort, fast. Everywhere. That's the main thing. And I think English people want a clever player, but I think something about the system, certainly in my lifetime, has almost driven that creativity out. So I think what happened was, before Gazza and in Gazza's era, to a lesser extent now, only mavericks really came through because the system drove people into being straightforward up and down players. Play the way you face. Don't take any chances. Get it out of there. Don't lose possession. Don't play a ball across your own penalty area. All of these sort of creative, dangerous things.
Yeah,
have always been coached out of players, and so you've only got people like Gazza doing it, and so Jack Grealish is a lesser case of that. He is a bit of a maverick. He's had his moments off the pitch, hasn't he? And hopefully he doesn't. He recognises the importance of not doing that. But I want Grealish in there because I don't want England. It's not a disaster. I don't really want Rice and Henderson to be England's midfield because they're both unadventurous. Is that a fair way?
I think that's a fair way. Yes, sort of defensive minded. Yeah.
So give me a player, give me a midfielder who will take a chance, who will try to dribble the ball past somebody, who will try to open something up. So I'm for Grealish. I know people query his output, and Gareth Southgate doesn't seem convinced, does he? There's something in Grealish that Southgate doesn't get, isn't there? So how much we'll see him, I don't know.
We'll see. But there are a couple of other players there that in the book, Beckham, and as you say, finish up with Raheem Sterling as well.
Yeah, so Beckham had to be in there again. There were other options. I mean, Beckham wasn't the best player. If you're doing a team from these 50 players, Beckham wouldn't be anywhere near it. But he made the absolute most of himself. And the other thing that Beckham, as well as allowing me to tell the England story and the clubs he played for, he played for Manchester United, played for Real Madrid, Milan, tells the story of the MLS growth as well. So, but the other thing, he was a pop cultural phenomena that we hadn't really had since George Best. He was very much a cross media superstar, David Beckham, and a huge name with intense media focus on him. And I admire Beckham. I like Beckham because he was a working class kid who came through, some talent, a shed load of hard work. I used to interview him a lot back in those days. He was polite. He not brilliantly articulate. He didn't really have many stories to tell or anything, but you know what? He fronted up. He answered your questions. He was nice, polite, well brought up, hardworking man. And there aren't many of them. There are more crazy stories in this book than there are people like David Beckham. And but obviously his England career was one of frustration and this slight sense of underachievement. I think, wasn't it, through the Sven years where we had a very good midfield. I sort of share Harry Redknapp's frustration. I remember the day I interviewed Harry Redknapp, who's at West Ham, the day after Sven's debut. And he said, "Oh, yeah, I'm glad we got that foreigner in to come and show us English dummies." What formation did he play? 4-4-2, was it? And he had. He literally, Sven had come, played a 4-4-2 and squeezed players into positions. And you think, what is that what we hired?
Yeah.
We stumbled through. We got the penalty shootouts. That's the story of that period, wasn't it? The penalty shootouts, and we just found different ways of shooting ourselves in the foot. Rooney being sent off, Beckham's missed penalty. That's the tale of that period. And then I come up to date with Raheem Sterling, And a couple of very frustrating tournaments, weren't there? 2014 was grim. It was, it was hard work, wasn't it? I remember, because it was in the middle of the night. I didn't go to that one, but it was in the middle of the night, sitting there watching that game against Italy, trying to keep my eyes open, and then we were out, weren't we? Lost against Uruguay, didn't we? Suarez killed us, and then that the Costa Rica game with no point. We were out by then, weren't we?
Yes.
So, so playing Costa Rica, trying to scrabble for a draw against Costa Rica for no purpose. But Raheem Sterling was involved in that, wasn't he? And then, of course, he became the focal point of the criticism of 2016, harshly, because it was a dreadful tournament, 2016, Euro 2016. And I don't think Roy Hodgson helped. I don't think that hangdog dour thing. I think an England coach needs to be like Venables. I mean, I think Southgate is good for this. He's a nice bloke, and I'm sure Gareth Southgate creates a nice atmosphere. Bear in mind, you don't need a tactical genius because you haven't got time. So you go, you cheer everyone up, you put them in a simple formation, you go and hope for the best. I think that's what international football is. It's not the same tactical minefield that club football can be.
You just don't have the time, do you?
No, yeah. It's just, you just got to be realistic and then ride a little bit of luck, because the tournaments are short. So if Greece can win it, if Portugal can win the Euros, then obviously England can win the Euros, but you've got to have some luck and you've got to give yourself the best chance by getting your tactics right and all of that. I don't think Roy Hodgson did any of that. I think we were too negative, particularly against Russia. If you remember, they were ancient Russia, weren't they? Yeah. And if I remember rightly, we didn't bring Vardy on, who was on fire at that time. And Raheem Sterling took the brunt of it. But I'm quite sympathetic in my write-up to the England players, the modern England players, because there were so many people. There was a BBC story on their website. I looked it up, and it was, Euro 26, I want to read the match reports again. England disgrace, or something like that. I'm thinking, is disgrace the word? They lost. They played poorly. They lost. So, have they, did they shame anybody? Did they do anything horrible to anybody? No. They were young guys who I think wanted to play, didn't have the best direction from Roy Hodgson. And I think what I see when I see England play a lot of the time is the expression is the heavy shirt. And I think it's a good expression. They underperform compared to their club teams out of a sense of desperation, because the whole nation is just urging England to do well. The media joins in, the fans, we're guilty of it. I'm both of those things. And I think just you watch England play at times in big games, and it's just like they're running through treacle. At other times, we turn it on and put in brilliant performances, and it lifts your heart again, doesn't it? But there are, through my England watching career, it just comes back every now and again. There's just going to be one of those games where we just, everyone freezes, and the Iceland game was probably the low point in my watching.
Yes. Wasn't a pleasant experience, that one.
No.
Not at all.
No.
I mean, this is a book that, the whole roll call of players there, as I say, it's not just England players, but there's a couple there that I'd be really interested to read about. And I know I've read a couple of the biographies or autobiographies, but there's a couple. Garrincha of Brazil has got an amazing story, hasn't he? And I'd be quite interested to hear about what you read about Eric Cantona.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, characters tend to get him. I mean, Garrincha was amazing. So I'm not here to recommend other people's books, but there is a really good biography of Garrincha by Roy Castro, so if you want that book, so read mine, everybody listening, read, because it's about, 7 pages or something. That's what they all are. I think the whole thing's 87,000 words. So every story, the average is 1,700 words, 1,800 words per chapter, which doesn't give me enough time to tell all the scandal of Garrincha. It was he's like Gaza squared, Garrincha. He was the amazingly talented. He knocked England out of the World Cup in 1962. Pele said he had an angel watching over him in that tournament. He was disabled, Garrincha. Yeah. He had his legs, his knees bent in the wrong direction. His one leg was shorter than the other. But what that did give him was this incredible low centre of gravity where he could change direction. Unbelievable. Unbelievable, like a motorcycle racer going around a corner. You'd get so low and then change direction. But he was an alcoholic. He was an alcoholic when he was a kid. He grew up. His dad was an alcoholic, and he grew up drinking this sweet Brazilian liquor thing, and to tragic consequences. So you're reading it, and part of you, we've got this odd attitude to to heavy drinking sports stars, haven't we? And that we're sort of fascinated and amused by them, but also sort of appalled and sad about it. And that's Garrincha all over.
Yeah.
He ran over his own father when he was drunk, and he killed his mother-in-law in a traffic accident when he was drunk, and in separate incidents. And you think, what? This man had just had the most intense, crazy life, and he died poverty-stricken at 49. I mean, it's absolutely, I mean, Garrincha, absolutely fascinating. And Cantona, there's a lot to squeeze in with Eric.
I bet.
He had a massive effect on English football. In a way, once he was in England, for all he jumped into the crowd and kung fu kicked a fan, it was actually in ways less eventful his time in England than he had been in France beforehand, because he came here. Ferguson dealt with him brilliantly. It was genius from Ferguson. He recognised a special talent and how to deal with it, and so he allowed Cantona is in it because of the effect he has on the English game, because he brings a new sort of sophistication. It was still blood and guts in 1992. You still had hardly any foreigners. I think it was 11, if I remember rightly, foreigners line up in the Premier League in the first day of the Premier League in 1992. Obviously, a lot of Scots and Irish who, to a large extent, gone out of the English top division. And so just those 11 guys, not remarkable players. But so Cantona comes, Cantona was already at Leeds, wasn't he? That they brought him. So he fell out. I think he had 6 clubs in France, and he fell out with them all in different ways, culminating in him being called up before the French disciplinary authority. And he walked to each member of the committee, and he walked up to them and looked in their face and said, "You're an idiot. You're an idiot. You're an idiot." So that was okay. So that was a way to go. So that was the end of him. And then Leeds got him. Leeds sold him cheap, which was, a bizarre move. I would like to think they regretted it. So the exploits in France. There was a lot to cram into that chapter, Eric Cantona, because he did a lot of crazy things in France before he got to England and reshaped football with an intelligent striker coming back and playing in midfield, which now we're used to. Obviously, now the idea of having 2 guys stuck up the top of the pitch is seen as a bit antiquated. Actually, there's a case for it sometimes, but hardly anyone does it in the Premier League these days. And a lot of that is, Cantona led the way. So in that respect, he fits the bill. He was influential.
Wow. It looks a very interesting book. It's called The 50, Football's Most Influential Players. It should be out by the time we re-release this. Where can people buy it from?
Your usual outlet. So it's published by Pitch Publishing. So you can have a look on their website. But it's on, if you want to share my money with Jeff Bezos, feel free to buy it on Amazon. Smith's, Waterstones, all of those, certainly all those websites, whether it's in your local store or not, I don't know. If it's not in your local store, order it in. Do me a favour. But yeah, it's all the usual. So yeah. Just search the 50 by John Driscoll. Yeah, Pitch Publishing.
Great stuff. And I'm sure you'll be pushing it out on Twitter. You're on Twitter, aren't you, if anyone wants to follow you?
I am, at Driscoll FC. That's me. So anyone who does follow me, hopefully you'll be sick of the sound of me banging on about this book. No. Yeah, please go and buy it. I hope you enjoy it.
It looks a good read, and it'll be an ideal stocking filler, as they say, I guess.
Good point.
John, thank you very much for your time.
Absolute pleasure. Great talking to you, Russell. Thank you.
As always, thank you very much for listening. Always very much appreciated. Thank you to John there for his time. You can follow him on Twitter at Driscoll11. And the book, it should be available, as he said, in all good bookstores. You can follow the podcast on various social media channels. Just search 3 Lions Podcast. And we'll be back very soon digesting the international window, where England have faced Ireland, Belgium and Iceland. Hopefully, it's a positive one, and I hope you can join me for it. Until then, stay safe, look after yourselves and each other. Please continue to follow the guidelines, as much as a pain in the bum they are. But hopefully, this time, it'll all be worthwhile. And the next time England are in action, we'll all be in a position where we can attend. Cheers.